you so much for noting the timing and logging at 5:30 this evening. We have done that for your benefit, where you can watch the IP at 7:30. So we are starting another lively talk this evening at 5:30. Change, innovation, and disruption in my company. A perspective on the change around us and the implication on us. We have got some outstanding panelists this evening. The distinguished speaker for this evening is Mr. Neeraj Chandra, who will be introduced later. Then we also have a very special invitees, outstanding special invitees who will be sharing their perspective as well, also in conversation with the speaker, and they'll also answer Q&A whenever the question is raised. We have Mr. Arvind Balaji. Mr. Arvind Balaji also is already logged in. He's the Joint Managing Director of Lucas TVS. Mr. Irina Vittal, Independent Director, and Mr. Rajiv Agarwal, Founder and CEO of Innovative Payments and Solutions Private Limited. We have our Mr. Balraman, who is a former, who was also a past president of MMA, who was from MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, and the former director of Hindustan Unilever, Polaris. And as you all know, he's done 2 tenures as the president of MMA, and he's one person who has been driving us to constantly improve. And one thing which he told me is on how to improve the brand. Today's talk, Mr. Neeraj is also one of the advisors for us to do how to take brand MMA higher. So we are going to have an excellent evening. And now I request Mr. Balraman to please introduce the speaker on the content. Over to you, Mr. Balraman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We normally used to start this program at 6 o'clock. The CSK match today disrupted us, so we needed to change. And that tells you something about the title and its impact on us. Change is not something that is new to any one of us. Actually, we live amidst change all the time. The Sanskrit word for the world is very funnily Jagat. There are 2 syllables, Jagat, which means coming and going. So our ancestors knew 5,000 years ago that the world we live in is one that is constantly in a flux. So they also said that nothing in this world is real, because they went on to say, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mityam. Now, that's too much for all of us, so we will leave it there. The real point is, what is our attitude to change? Do we ignore change? Can we afford to? Do we anticipate change? Do we adapt to change? Or do we adopt change? The difference, of course, is if you adopt change, you own the change. Or you go a lot further and you actively create change. Which is the right thing to do? What will suit you? What will suit you in your business context? And that is the kind of discussion that Neeraj wants to initiate today. And in Pons, I had told you that we believed in getting the very best of the brains and provide them with huge challenges and trust them and totally support them, which we did in the case of Neeraj Chandra also. And he changed Pons. He disrupted our marketing process. But the brands cannot be disrupted. Brands can be only changed, because brands are forever. And he did that also. A wonderful young man from whom I learned a lot of marketing myself. And typically following the Pons process, Neeraj has also got excellent brains to support us today. Arvind Balaji is someone whom I value very highly. I know him very well. He is an outstanding person, a young leader, someone from whom I think India can expect a huge lot in the years to come. Irina Vettel, again, Irina, congratulations to you, and because your husband, Airtel today, is shown to be the highest value brand in telecom. So convey our congratulations to him, and congratulations to you as well. Mr. Rajiv Agarwal is someone whom I had not met, but I read that he's from IIT Bombay. He's a doctorate there. So Dr. Agarwal, warm welcome. So today we are doing what we used to do in ponds all the time. We bring the brightest of minds and trust them to solve the greatest of problems. So here are the problems, and Neeraj, will you outline the problem?
Thank you. Thank you, Group Captain and MMA, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to all the members who've logged in and the panelists who truly make this forum really special for me. Thank you, Reena. Thank you, Rajiv. And thank you, Arvind. It's a privilege getting introduced by Mr. Balraman. Mr. Balraman has been my boss, my mentor, my guide. And apart from all the affection and support, he's also instilled deep values of consumer centricity, the pond's value of incessantly seeking something which is new and better, and above all, an abiding faith in people. Much of these will reflect in some of the things we discuss today. Mr. Balraman mentioned the innovation at ponds, which was significant. And from there, I went on to look at innovation and new category creation over several years. But what triggered off the area of today's discussion was actually a trivial incident which took place 4 years ago. I had landed back in Bangalore and my car battery was drained. So I called up this large international manufacturer and asked about my battery. After around 10 minutes, I was told, yes, I could come and pick it up with my dead battery and the car not starting. They then said they would be able to deliver it home, maybe in 2 days' time, at an extra cost. Frustrated, I just went on my phone and found somethingbattery.com and dialed up after seeing that the product was available. The person said, sir, do you mind? I'll be late. It's 45 minutes it'll take. So I said, fine. And in 30 minutes came in this guy, very professionally clad with all the professional tools. And in 5 minutes, he had replaced the battery, got the warranty stamped and gone away. This, for me, was an aha moment. In 5 minutes, 4,000 rupees worth of sales had shifted from the conventional to a not so conventional. But what was even more interesting to me was somebody had understood my needs. He had understood what changes are happening in things like the internet and created a new way of building a business. And really, he had exploited the change very well. It's my belief that there are tectonic changes happening all around us, changes which can transform our business. I really marvel at it and would like to invite you to jointly, along with me, discover some of the possibilities. It is a journey of discovery rather than a journey of an old experience. And that's what I'd like to share with you. Sorry, just 1 second while technology resolves itself. Yep.
You're on.
Yep. So I would like to share with you my perspective on this. And really, it's going to be in 2 sections. The first of exploring and looking at the change around us and try to understand it. And the second one of trying to see what do we do and what are its implications on us. When you look at this maze of change around us, perhaps a simple way to understand it is by thinking of our identity, i.e., who are we, what do we think, and also thinking about how do we do. Bad English, but captures the spirit of what I mean, that how do we do things on this. If we look at who are we, at independence, probably dhoti clad, certainly rural influenced, but by the turn of the century, we were 1 billion people and known for being a young population. But big fat changes have happened since that time. And I would like to illustrate to you some of these by considering a small microcosm of our country, let's say Delhi. Our population by 1999 had crossed 1 billion. But if you look at Delhi, Delhi had a population of 15 million in 1999, and this increased to close to 28 million to 30 million today. There is a possibility that it will edge out Tokyo by 2028 and become a 37 million and the largest city in the world. Clearly, there is a surge of urbanization, and this is reflected in the totality of India. A third of India is urban today, and by 2030, it'll be half of it. If you include the great influences coming through with better connectivity, even the balance of it is largely, increasingly urban. Clearly, the agenda today in India is urban and no longer rural. That is something which we must take for read out here. Another aspect is that of income. Delhi had an income level of 42,000 at the turn of the century, and today it's around 360,000. Discounted for inflation, that's tripled, and it's going to triple again by the year 2030. If you step back, we will see that on a global scale, never before have 1/3 of the world's population become so prosperous. In the last 20 years, we've had a situation where India has increased income 6 times and China over 12 times. This has resulted in a surge of disposable income. And the question is, what are people going to spend on? Where is the change? Let's take a look at another thing which reflects on who we are, which is what are we composed of, what population groups? So in Delhi, a majority, over 50% and growing, is composed of the working age group now, very different from earlier where the youth were much higher, where the young were much higher. There is an increasing percentage of women and women working. And therefore, from this, a lot of the cohorts which are there, a lot of the people you like to target are very different today. Social structures have indeed changed. Let's take a look at our context. What do we think? What influences us? And if you look at this, these have certainly changed in the last 10 to 20 years. There is a lot more belief in alternate living. It's a far more volatile world which people are contending with. Brahmanical restraint has given way to consumerism, and increasingly the Indian is global. This all reflects in our choices in what we seek. And therefore, if you were to look at this, today India has new needs, a new consumer, a consumer which is far younger, richer, a different composition in terms of this. And along with this transformation of needs comes new product opportunities, new things we'd like to do. This is true not only at an individual level. Our cities have become much larger. They are veritable city-states in themselves. And with these city-states, there come new challenges for us. Challenges which are in the area of sanitation, challenges which are in the area of doing things for transport, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And therefore, if we look at this, what we will see that we have a huge amount of change, and along with that, a huge amount of opportunity, which is there with us. I think the next thing which we would like to take a look here is in terms of where do we go with how do we do things. Right? We've seen that who we are and what we think is different. But let's take a closer look at how do we do things around. The big difference, the poster child of change, is the phone. And phones have changed dramatically over the last several years. What they have done is not only change the way we talk, but also we've changed the whole thing across in terms of how do we take photographs, etc. But more than all of this, the bigger issue is that phones have provided us with ubiquitous connectivity. We have connectivity now everywhere. And if phones have provided connectivity, we've had the internet and social networks providing us a platform and also providing us with the purpose to take this forward. These changes have been large and rapid. We are today the largest consumers of data, more than 1 billion phones, and it's all happened in a short period of time. We're the biggest in terms of, almost one of the biggest countries in terms of social networking memberships. But what makes this different, what makes this tectonic is not the speed or the size of the change, but the immense impact that these have had in terms of the way we live and the way we do. What has happened is that there is now a new social discourse because of social networking. People talk to each other differently, people express them differently, and we are seeing a much better way in which the power of the individual is getting expressed and taken across to the world. This has resulted in new ways of customized responses. It's also resulted in a new body politic of sorts, in the sense that new views surface, extreme views surface, and the way conversations happen has dramatically changed. If we look at this and see where does this take us next, there are multiple triggers which are emerging. E-commerce and banking have shifted the world of transactions into a different dimension. Other spaces have changed, whether it's education, whether it is health, and many other spaces have also moved to this different dimension. The question I have is, with these changes, would your space change, or can it change, or has it changed? Another big shift has been the development of the apps. Starting in 2007, when Apple released its codes for external developers, there has been a flurry of what I call assisted doing. It all got pulled into the personal space and apps have started coming across all over. With this, what is happening is there's a totally new concept of me, my time, my place, which is coming into what we do. Many of these things which have happened because they offer a better way to the consumers. And at the heart of it, there is this whole rise of computation. Computation has been used extensively in the corporate world since the 60s, but towards the turn of the century, moved into the personal world. From information to computation to analysis and onwards. Essentially, what's happened is intelligence has got added into what we do. And this intelligence added is making a big difference. To take it to a different league has been another big shift. And this shift is about seamlessness. So things like voice and vision have broken barriers for people to interact with this intelligence. Things like IoT have spread it to a much wider universe of things that do, while things like the cloud have virtually enabled a connection with an almost infinite sense of intelligence which is there. Now, when we look at this, what we find is that as we progress from analytics to assistance, there is a big shift, and the elephant in the room is artificial intelligence. Some of this is promising big changes, but also big fears in terms of whether livelihoods will remain or not. So it is possible we'll adjust to it, but what is also possible is in this, the whole concept of living would change. So if we scan how we do things, what we are discovering is that there is a big shift in the way in which we do things. And what is important is not just the technology, but the paradigms of living and doing have changed. A lot of this has been in the sense of intelligence being added, but there is also a big shift in another dimension. If you look at motive power or ability to do things, Let me call that Karya Shakti. That is changing in different fields dramatically, promising far bigger things which can be done in a way which is different or better. It started off with the world of computation, which enabled the intelligence. But increasingly, in the area of materials, life sciences, robotics, energy, huge changes are happening. Many of them, in fact, in the case of drones, quite literally add a new dimension to the way we can do things or such. Therefore, if we just took a look at this, what we would see is a situation where the world has changed in terms of what we do, and this change is the opportunity with us. If you look at it from the context of where we are today and the time we are in today, there is further stuff which comes on and adds to this change. India, perhaps, has the maximum amount of change. With a leapfrogging of generations of technology, with a huge economic growth, the rate is the highest. Our scale makes us unique. Even garbage for us is a big source of opportunity. What's even more different is that we have multiple challenges. Challenges of poverty, challenges of low penetration of categories, challenges of health. But these challenges, once again, become in themselves an opportunity for us. If you look at today's times, there is COVID. Disasters have always contributed to change, whether it's in the Indus Valley, whether it is change which took place with the Kobe earthquake. But COVID has come in at a scale which is probably the highest, probably at its maximum, with causing disruptions to almost everybody on the planet. But it has also done, it has changed the way we interact, the change we have in the way we work, and the change the way we transact a living. And what's more, it has also changed our outlook to the way we look at doing things differently. In a nutshell, therefore, that's where we stand in the context of change. I'd like to, at this stage, pause for a minute, and before we get into trying to see where do we go from this change and the strands which are moving us around. So I would request if there are any questions, any views, any things at this stage on the nature of change, if they can surface for us.
You are continuing, right?
After that, I'll continue with what do we do with the change.
Yeah.
So any views, any questions on this? I think if we take this further and try and see how do we harness this opportunity which is there in front of us, I would like to share a couple of thoughts on what we need to do, and thereafter a few thoughts on what could make that happen for us in our own companies. And therefore, see how can we take advantage of the change. Let me start with the first one, which is in terms of what do we need to do. A critical thing is to try and discover our need, our opportunity. And this can come from a powerful understanding of our world in terms of exploring and seeing what is the relationship with our businesses and ourselves and what is the change which is happening. We could look at this and identify opportunities coming from the varieties of triggers which we had seen. It could be in the context of new urban needs, which give us some idea and understanding of what we want to do. It could be what income is raising in terms of getting things as new business ideas or new categories. Things, for example, like white goods and other things which may be there. A look at the discovering the opportunity could happen for new appeals, like for organic products and other kinds of products, or by looking at new sectoral models, which may emerge, e.g. in the context of, let's say, healthcare, or in the context of, let's say, things like big basket, etc., etc. So we have to look at different triggers and therefore come at try and discover what are the kinds of new needs, new target groups which we can address in our context. As we discover this, we got to recognize that many of the categories which we conventionally see are morphing. They're changing. A clear example could very well be seen, let's say, in the world of cinema, which has changed from cinema to multiplexes and now going over the top into various kinds of things like Netflix, etc., etc. There are morphing categories. There's also a different composition of the offering. Service is becoming a much bigger component. So if you look at personal care, people today are spending several times more on personal care services versus just personal care products, at least in some sections of society. There are new paradigms of what is the benefit. Customization is giving immense value. Sometimes data and information is giving value, e.g. as in assisted health apps. So we have to discover the new needs which are there. We have to discover the difference which we can cater to here. What is true, however, in all of this, often the need, the thing which can make the difference lies in the change, because that is untapped. That is the thing which can give us more value. The other side of the coin is disrupting and transforming the delivery of items. Disruption in the IT, or rather in the computation electronics industry, has been par for the course for a long, long time. But in other industries, it is increasingly hitting us, and we have to figure out what can we do to disrupt or transform the delivery which we are looking at. It could once again come from the variety of triggers we had seen in our understanding of change. You could have a situation where, considering your industry, one could explore, is there a possibility of adding intelligence to our product and making it more valuable? It could be like in the context of, let's say, healthcare, in the area of diagnostics. It could be in terms of various ways where analytics is adding value in offering you a better deal. You could look at transforming delivery by aggregation and optimizing the benefit. Or in terms of new technologies, which could be, let's say, in the area of, let's say, electronic vehicles, energy, or whatever is relevant to you. So there are triggers for disruption which are well available in the environment today. And we're going to explore which of these can we use. When we are looking at this, we are, of course, delivering differently. But very often, you also deliver a difference, in the sense new benefits are surfacing which probably did not exist in the minds of the consumer. And therefore, as we explore this, we will get a delivery which is different and benefits which are different, which is coming across. It's like saying, if you look at fintech or in the world of payments, you could have a situation where much more than just facilitating payments, you've gone beyond that and have enabled all kinds of other value-added benefits, which is coming through the data which payments is offering. The other aspect I'd like to highlight in this is the aspect of technology. Yes, in several cases, new technology and technological development is essential for the company. But in many cases, it is the application which today can drive the difference, and especially in our kind of sectors. And how do we really apply it creatively is the question, so that we can change the way customers are seeing. So if you took a look at, let's say, uh, a disruption in the supply chain of vegetables, which is coming in from a company like Big Basket, the technology is available. It is the application and applying it in a different way which is creating the disruption in the industry. And this changes the offering, the product, and makes a difference. But there's another way in which we can look at these differences, which is not necessarily in terms of the end product, but in terms of the process. And let's take a look at the process of marketing or digital marketing, which has been one of the shifts in the processes. We've had excellent examples of this in an earlier talk by Mr. Sitaram on some of these. But this is not something which is limited only to consumer products. And while things like Facebook and digital marketing spends have overtaken the normal, the conventional, it's also reaching areas which you wouldn't have thought. And I have here, for example, an illustration of the Farnborough Air Show, which really is using digital marketing to reach out to different groups. And therefore, this is something which is spreading to groups where we thought we couldn't have applications of this kind. Similarly, what kind of channels can we use? Can they be different? And of course, the bigger channels like Amazon and other mainstream things are well known. But this is also opening out new ways of entering for specialized products. For example, there is Medica Bazaar, which essentially is in hospital supplies, and therefore new device manufacturers find this a great channel. Or even in the case of, let's say, personal care, when Nykaa is another example of this. We could find this application in a variety of other processes. And let me just quickly illustrate one in the case of supply chain. The earliest example of this, perhaps, is the big change which took place in newspapers. When we moved from typesetting to digital layouts and transmission across things, which changed the way newspapers and editions came out. There's a lot of new efficiency things which have been talked about by Mr. Molly in another context. But there also are things which are happening in terms of new delivery mechanisms, whether it's monitoring the supply chain better using IoT in terms of, let's say, the cool chain, or looking at 3D printing to speed up some kinds of development. So there is a lot which is taking place in each of these processes. What can we do which we can take advantage of it? In some cases, the entire business model is changing. And the earliest example of this is something like Make My Trip or the travel industry, which changes burden model totally. Or even in the case of healthcare, where people like Keto are crowdsourcing funds for treatment. So there is enormous scope which we need to discover for disrupting and transforming our delivery. As we look at this, I would go to the extent of saying that if we can't find a different way to transform the delivery, we have a problem. It is impossible for any company to not have a place where we can't use what is available to make a difference. In that sense, it is mandatory for us to do that. If we therefore combine the three, the area of discovery of need, the discovery of different things which you can do in terms of benefits, along with disrupting the delivery and the processes, they jostle with each other. they create new opportunities that are composite in nature. I have a host of words and examples on the side which illustrate. And the purpose of this is not to say that you can be like that or that is the way to go for your individual company. But the purpose of this is to illustrate that this has happened across a huge variety of spaces, which range from healthcare, where companies like THB and Ingen are, to things like food service and delivering of food, e.g. Swiggy, which goes into things which are in male grooming like Beardo, health sciences like Strand, etc., etc. So there is a huge spectrum of companies which are doing this, of finding the new reality on this. Equally, there are very different models of disruption which are coming into play. In some cases, business models, in some cases, technology, which is combining with this and giving a difference around. There are new needs which are coming out of this. So really speaking, if we look at this whole area, we have to explore, question, and transform. It is as much a creative and envisioning situation as that of a rational exercise of trying to find out more. I would at this stage just request somebody to consider what's happening in the fintech space. And I would request Rajiv to give any his views on how has he seen the opportunities coming from his company's point of view and anything which he'd like to add before I move it further.
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj, and thanks to MMA and the group captain and Mr. Balaraman for to participate here. Actually, let me take some time to share my thoughts as I was listening to Neeraj. And I'm going to speak a lot more from a technology perspective, coming from a technology industry. I think the core thing that we have seen coming from the technology space is that there has been a change in the way people have looked at technology over time. So in the early days, we were looking at technology as a tool. It was like a new pair of pliers or a new kind of a hacksaw with which you could do things better, faster. And slowly from there, it started getting to a point where you started thinking using technology, saying that, okay, if I have this, is there something more that I can do, or is there something different I can do? I think the major change that we are seeing now, especially in the past 10 years, not so much in India, but internationally outside of India, is that people have started discovering new things using technology. And it is not discovering use cases. It is not saying that I can do the same thing better, faster, cheaper, but complete discovering use cases which didn't exist, which were not possible. They were not there in your imagination altogether. And I think that's very, very exciting. Why that's exciting is because that brings us about an opportunity of democratizing access for everyone. So earlier, for example, the people who had the information, the people who had the knowledge, were considered as the wise people. And then slowly technology democratized that. I could search on Google and get the same information as somebody else who was sitting in a better college. And that led to people saying, okay, so access to information doesn't matter, but how do you read the information matters. And therefore intelligence started coming into play, saying that, okay, I am more intelligent than you, I have better tools, I am more analytical than you. And I think that switched to the point where it has started moving to imagination, saying, look, everybody has the same tools. They are all available open source. Everybody has the same knowledge, is available on Google. What you can do with it is going to be far more powerful than just having access to it. And that is, if I take it in our context in financial services, so we provide payment solutions to merchants primarily. And for a very long time, for almost about a decade, we used to keep thinking that my customer was a merchant. I needed to provide him with a payment solution so that he can accept payments from consumers coming to his outlet to buy groceries or coming to his outlet to buy furniture or buy durables. And of late, we started realizing that actually our customer was not the merchant. our customer was actually the consumer coming to the merchant. And that, when we started thinking in that way, it started bringing about a change. And we started realizing that it's very interesting. When a payment transaction is happening, is it only the movement of money between the buyer or the seller, or is there something more happening? And at a very fundamental level, what hit us hard was that whenever a payment transaction happens, it's actually the consummation of the vision of three other different kinds of businesses who has spent a lot of money in making the transaction happen. Who are these businesses? The merchant, where the product is getting sold, the brand whose product is getting sold, and the bank whose probably digital instrument is getting used. So if you look at it that way, you see that a payment transaction is no longer a transaction. It is actually a business collaboration. Because if the transaction doesn't happen, neither the merchant nor the brand nor the bank's business is going anywhere. So it starts becoming much more, you start looking at payment transactions as collaborations between businesses, the ultimate moment of truth. Because unless the money doesn't move, all those business plans and marketing plans are nowhere. So when you start looking at it that way, then you start realizing that, oh, that's interesting. So when I'm sitting on a transaction, I'm actually sitting on a brilliant collaboration between three very different kinds of sellers. Somebody is a seller of financial services, somebody is a seller of brands, somebody is a seller of access. Three very different kinds of businesses who all want to target a common consumer. And maybe I can be his business collaboration engine. I'm no longer just the guy who moves the money. I'm the guy who can bring together these three different kinds of sellers of benefits, three different categories of benefits. I can bring them together to access the common consumer at 1/3 the cost, in a far more targeted manner, in a far more outcome-based manner, because the particular targeting is going to happen only when the consumer actually pays, and in a far more equal and unbiased manner. There's nobody large, nobody small inside it. So I am actually much more powerful than just the money mover. So that's a kind of thing, changes that are happening in the fintech space also that we see, where people are slowly realizing that, look, you are not just a marketplace which is bringing together a buyer and a seller. You sometimes are actually enabling people who did not talk to each other otherwise to even start creating conversation. These businesses who were talking to the same consumer were never talking to each other. We're actually bringing conversations between them. So these are some of the examples of things that are happening. I think this reimagination is the exciting part of what change is happening in our space. Thanks, Neeraj. Over to you.
Thank you. I think it's interesting what started off as a transaction becomes a value-added kind of a collaborative thing. It is yet powered by the platform which is technically based, but the application is in extracting a very different kind of value which is resident in this whole space. Some of this may not have been the way it was seen a few years ago. Apart from the individual businesses, infrastructure is also getting created. For example, cool chains, food service things across is big and is becoming a new source of adding value or new business opportunity which is emerging along with other chains. Similarly, data engines, people who provide data and analyze, is another way in which the infrastructure itself is providing an opportunity for new businesses there. Essentially, when we look at this, another aspect comes, which is the way in which sectors change. And I'd like us to just take a look at one of these sectors, which is the healthcare sector. Healthcare is roughly around a $180 billion sector, growing anywhere between 12 to 15%, with three major components, the largest of which is delivery. If you look at this, the core of these sectors itself is changing. We have a situation where even in these cores, you're having new models coming up. So for example, a host of single specialties in the delivery space, new models like Glocal, which are actually trying to deliver much better into a rural setup, or even the much more popularized part of teleconsults and critical care, which are coming in post-COVID. Similarly, there are new drug discoveries which have been there, but going on to a different way of doing things and a different scale and change. or even in the diagnostic space, where things like teleradiology and data handling, along with other things like genomics, etc., is resulted in a different way of looking at diagnostics. So there is a change which is happening in the core of these sectors. But what is interesting is also there are layers of subsidiary ways of doing things. Not subsidiary is the wrong word for it, probably, of additional ways of doing things which are getting added. So the whole space of healthcare analytics is becoming big in terms of, and companies like THB or Sigtuple are providing the data which enables better action. A lot of examples in medtech where companies are providing inputs which enable um, which enable adding value to the entire way of diagnostic care or cure. Aided health, where, as I mentioned, apps are providing better cures around and in the area of diabetes and stuff of that kind. And there are many other examples. Aggregators, health finance. But what is really happening is that this is leading to a value migration and a value enhancement which is happening in the sector, and many, many more opportunities get seen. So that happens, but along with that, what is also happening is that discovering this change through various people, the social needs and the challenges of healthcare, which is three, which is better access, better care, and better cost, is also getting delivered. Sorry. The question here for us who do it for our own companies is to ask ourselves, what is our space? And in our space, what are the challenges? Who are the challengers? And what is the opportunity? Because that itself is changing. And this is true of virtually any space which we operate in. I'd like to take another aspect of this, which is in something which is very much more mundane. And I want to take example of a simple thing like the battery. It is anchored in semi-urban rural and it's a depleting core, largely selling zinc carbon batteries, the D cell or the AA, largely in these kind of places. The field is declined, the field is reducing, and really where are opportunities is the kind of thought which comes in. But even here, there are changes which have to be taken on board. So you have a build up of a new urban base. There are new channels like the things which sell different kind of electricals and specialized things are a new channel for batteries. And I'll come to some more in a minute's time. There is new competition. People like Amazon with their Solimo batteries and a new type of competition which is coming in. So there is a change which has to be taken into account. If we look at it differently, and let's say we look at it from the context of the value migration which is happening in batteries. So increasingly, batteries are becoming more specialized and smaller. They're not supposed to be consuming a huge amount of power at once, but are supposed to be better protection, and they charge a pretty penny for that. So there is a value migration which is happening in batteries. Similarly, there's new battery tech which is coming in, which can deliver much more. Or if you look at it from the need side, a battery is at the end of it, something which delivers a convenience. So in the good old days, a battery and a torch went in hand, and the battery was delivering a convenience. So if you look at the world of conveniences as a world of devices, these are growing like blazes across in an urban setup. Different kinds of devices for different kinds of things, where the value between the cell and the device is changed. Equally, portability is another way of looking at the battery space, and portability is the new normal, whether it's portable mosquito repellents or whether it is something else, something as mundane of that nature. So there is a way of looking at the changes which are resulting in different opportunities. Last but not least, there are even further things further far away, which is things like high energy battery uses like EVs and other ways of charging and so on and so forth. So even in something like a battery, which is considered as an area which frankly has no energy, uh, is there is a possibility of change being enormous, almost to the extent of saying the business needs to be repurposed. And this is not only true of batteries, it could be true of things like tractors and farm implements. What do we do with them? What can we add value in? And you can imagine the whole new space from it. Or even the case of locks. With newer needs, newer technologies, there's a lot which is possible. So essentially, you could virtually go to the extent of repurposing your business as you look at change as it's affecting the needs. Just stepping back, I'd like to raise two issues. One specifically is the conclusion which comes from a lot of this, which is we have to do different things and do things differently. And there are many things which are associated with this. We are virtually finding that we can have change and opportunity in things which range from the mundane to the sublime, from things like locks to things like drones or other things classically associated with more advanced. We are finding the opportunity to actually change in every process. We are having the opportunity of having changes which are large and small. Sometimes a small change has a large impact. And one which I remember here the most is something from experience of, let's say, something as simple as sachets. They've created a big impact. Sometimes a small change needs a very large effort. So if you have a different target group, you've got to virtually change your business system. You've got to change your offering and so on and so forth. And not last and not the least is this whole bit of repurposing, a need to rethink of what is there. So there is a lot in what we do, things differently, and how do we do things which are different. There is another aspect which is a bit more vexing, and I'd like to, as I get into this, just introduce that and pull in a debate. And that debate is in this whole dance of continuity and change, the big and the small. A lot of the examples which we've seen have come from relatively newer companies. And there is often a blank or a lesser population of change opportunities which is seen with larger companies. Does it have something to do with the DNA of such companies, the need for change to be pursued with greater passion and greater resilience, and that kind of risk-taking ability being less maybe in larger companies, or is it something different? There is another argument of large companies being focused on scale and efficiency and not change. And therefore, with their mandate, is that the place to be? I don't know. I have a couple of points on that. If you look at it, I don't know whether large companies can change or not, but companies which have embraced change have indeed become large. So the FANG set is one which has embraced change and is certainly large. There is a lot of examples of countries like China growing by embracing infrastructure on scale, on looking at efficiency as a big driver by cutting costs and making themselves most attractive. But equally, one would see that in the last 5 to 10 years, the biggest focus of the Chinese juggernaut has come through in areas which are more like 5G, which are more like AI based, which is more like developing things which have been developed by Tencent and sent across the world, and is therefore change the other layer which is coming in. I'd like to get a viewpoint here from somebody like Irina, for whom this is, I would say, an area of expertise. Irina, any views on purpose change larger companies, smaller companies, or anybody else? Because this is an area where there is a lot of debate, and the relevance of change for larger companies is something we have to consider.
Reena, are you there? I think group captain, can you unmute her?
No, she's there. She has come. She just came in.
Is
Shankar?
the mic unmute?
Shankar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for unmuting me. Neeraj, I think this is a fascinating topic. And the thing that strikes me is, we have to be kind to large companies. A lot of the large companies that survive know how to do continuous improvement, which is basically doing what they do more efficiently. And if folks don't know how to do that, they just die. I think the real question that you are posing is, beyond continuous improvement, is it possible for large companies to reimagine themselves? And the reason it's become even more critical in the last 5 years is because technology is only one big shift. The other big shifts are around competition. Who you compete with today is perhaps not who you competed with a few years ago, just because industry structures have become so fluid. Regulations have changed. The way government thinks about regulations, thinks about industry structures is fundamentally different, and it's going to be even more interesting in the years to come as borders shut down, to see what that will do to businesses. And finally, of course, cost of money has changed. And if you look at valuations versus WACC, and you think about what that means for risk or implied risk, and suddenly you're able to do stuff that you couldn't do before, and vice versa. So I think the drivers of change for large companies is not just tech, but also all of the other stuff. And in my experience with them, I find that the person to blame, or the thing to blame, is actually the human brain. Because Neeraj, the human brain was not created to think, it was created to survive. And one of the ways it survives is by reducing energy that it spends. And one of the ways it does that is to create mental models which help us process the world very quickly. And these mental models are based on pattern recognition. And so a large organization, great CEOs, especially successful CEOs, end up having mental models, which are their quick ways of assessing the world. And the companies and the CEOs who are able to continuously reimagine themselves, I think, have to discard and find new mental models. And I'm sure this is going to be the discussion that you're going to have with us in the last part of your story. But to me, large companies that change have CEOs who are able to reframe the context for themselves, basically by using a fresh pair of eyes to look at the world. The best CEO I know sacks himself and his team on December 31st every year. And on Jan 1st, hires everybody back and says, this is our first day in the business. What do we see? I think they reframe the context for the individuals. When you do something momentous, you have to do it in the most simple way. And using a word like change scares the bejesus out of everybody. And so the great organizations that are able to reimagine are able to sell change as a very simple thing, which does not frighten away individuals. And more importantly, the individual is able to see what he has to do differently and how he will survive and be part of this new future that is being designed. And finally, I think great companies are able to reframe the context for their institutions. Mechanisms like making sure that while you're delivering on performance of this year, you also have metrics and people who are delivering on the health of tomorrow. So to me, companies that are able to embrace reimagination, manage the risk by really reframing the context, looking at the world with a fresh pair of eyes, first for the CEO, then for individuals in the top team, and then for the organization.
Great. Great.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Sure.
Area when the large organizations you are talking of do this, are they trying to adapt to an inevitable change in the environment, or are they trying to create the change themselves? Are they looking at the trends in sociology, economics, and national borders and so on? And are they trying to reimagine the future and create products for that future, which is not yet there?
Mr. Bilraman, I think it's both. I think you will have, because this is a continuous exercise, I think great organizations have the mechanics, if you will, inside an organization to be externally oriented, to be able to sense what is happening, and to do it through processes and to do it through capacity that is tasked, whose metric is only to sense and see where the world is going, to do proof of concept, then to think about how to internalize, change internal processes, and then to scale up. But equally importantly, none of this happens if the few guys at the top. I don't think change is democratic. I think change is driven by a few people, because at the end of the day, you have to be willing to discard your skin partially or fully and wear a new skin. And that is a dangerous exercise for everybody to do. And so to me, equally importantly, you need the right kind of folks somewhere in the system who are willing to live with the period of uncertainty when change manifests itself. I mean, the best example for me on this is New York Times, and how, Neeraj, you'll be delighted. It's a large organization that is absolutely stunning in the way it has reinvented itself. And if you go back and look at what they did, they brought in this guy from BBC, who is now leaving after 7 years and having transformed the media organization. But they also had an internal team, which consisted of their own folks, who wrote an absolutely stunning document what the change was. None of it was dramatic. None of it was AI. None of it was new, but it was just putting together all the jigsaw puzzle pieces and saying, you know, we're no longer an elephant. It's time for us to be a jaguar, right? And you needed the team to do that because they had internal processes, but you also needed a fresh pair of eyes who came in and said, you know, if we continue to do more of the same, we're going to die. So are we going to embrace ourselves? So I have seen that the great organizations who do this again and again have the mechanics, but they also have the magic that one or two people at the top bring by embracing this new blue book, and then by being the evangelists for it for 2, 3, 4 years, when it's messy and dirty and not proven, but one has to still chug along.
They each had Steve Jobs of their own.
Yes. And Steve Jobs, they also have a Tim Cook. I mean, every Steve Jobs has a Tim Cook. Without Tim Cook, Steve Jobs is only a visionary. And without Steve Jobs, Cook is just a supply chain efficiency guy.
Years ago, when Motorola first came up with the satellite phone, I used to think the ultimate the man will want is that not carry anything in his pocket. He would like to have something in his ear. So the moment he thinks of, say, the moment I think of Neeraj Chandra, it should automatically call him. And the moment Neeraj Chandra thinks of me, this device on my ear, which you cannot see, will connect me. So that day has not come yet, but I think your people like Gopal Vittal will make it happen.
You know, one of the things which many large organizations tend to follow is this whole concept of 3 horizons of change. And really speaking, it's about the today, the tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. But even things like this perhaps need some kind of a change of looking at things. So what happens very often today is that we may be thinking as a corporation of our 3 horizons, but there'll be some guy, some person who is running a relatively newer operation who jump to the 3rd horizon straight away and therefore disrupt our environment and our opportunity. Equally, a lot of continuous change is happening today at faster pace within the realms of the 1st horizon. Suffice to say, there are different dimensions to this vexing question of continuity and change. In my view, the only thing I can say is that even large corporations need to engage with change far more significantly today than they did in the past. Is there a voice problem?
No, we can hear you.
I think 10-5, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, which brings me to having seen the whole area of change and the whole universe of change as we saw in the first part. We looked at what are some of the things important for us to do as we engage with change for ourselves. I think the most important question which comes in is how do you make it happen? And some parts of this were touched upon by Irina. In my view, while making the plan and doing things of insight is important, but the most important thing in making the change happen is the people and how do we organize things for that. And in that, there are 3 or 4 things which are important. I'd like to introduce a thought that one of the most important stuff for change to happen is the presence of change leaders, change seekers, and how do we bring about that cultural change. But what I'd like to do is, instead of talking more about it, I think we have somebody who's really given it deep thought, and I would rather hear his views, which come from a deep involvement day in and day out. May I request Arvind to give a view on how can this change happen and the role of change leaders and things of that kind towards that.
Good afternoon. This change always has this monster-esque view about what's going to happen. This devil that's going to eat you up kind of thing. and as Mr. Balraman said right in the beginning, it's the only thing that's actually constant. And we all think that actually we can control it or deny it or whatever, but it's there, and you just got to deal with it. I can share my context of this. I'm in the automotive industry. All the companies I run make components that go into the engine. And guess what? In my lifetime, all my components will become obsolete. Once the electric vehicle comes, none of my components will be required. So whether I want to change or not, I have to change if I have to survive. Now, this is the story being played out in industry after industry, year after year across the world. And you're talking about change, and Irina was talking about it also. 3 companies came to my mind. Amazon, which is one of the world's largest companies, but they seem to be like a startup every day. Then you have these huge auto companies, hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're changing and investing billions of dollars to transform their model because they have no choice. And then you have people like Kodak who gave up the ghost and died. So what differentiates all these companies? And at least to my mind, and I didn't talk about people retiring on December 31st and coming back on January. But even that, what keeps them motivated to actually continue doing what they're doing and respond to change? And in my mind, it has always been purpose. Those companies that have a clear view of purpose beyond the next quarter's results or beyond that year's results or even tomorrow or day after tomorrow, those who are driven by purpose have the ability to think in a more deep manner. And that ability also gives them a chance to create a cohesive culture in the organization. In my personal view, at least the culture we're trying to build is when there's so much change going on in the environment, it's really impossible for a complete top-down management. Top-down can set the culture, it can set the context, it can set the direction. But there are going to be so many changes that are going to happen at the grassroots unless you have a very organic organization which can kind of get the information in real time, like the way Microsoft has transformed. I don't think we are going to be able to tackle today's world. And so from my perspective, I think the single critical requirement for change is an organization that's driven by a purpose. So that kind of sets the moral compass or the directional compass. And second, ability to do whatever it takes to respond to that purpose. So if facts change, you change. And you're not stuck by some rules and regulations and things like that. I think that culture will give it both the continuity it requires as well as the ability to respond. many often I see we've gone black or white. Either we are fixed in our way or we are disruptive, and it almost borders on anarchy sometimes. So I think that balance between a direction as well as continuous change is what makes companies thrive, in my personal view.
Right. I think there is this strand of thought which is coming in with the whole purpose, the whole culture piece, the bit of having change leaders, like what Irina mentioned, which drives a lot of the work there. Also, I think in companies which are more rooted in the change and not changing so much in the past, there is this whole aspect of how do you change the culture? How do you make people seek something which is more flexible, something which is different when they've been conditioned into doing the same thing day in and day out? And there are a large number of companies which may not be in a stage where they have absorbed the concept of change into the regular continuity. There is another aspect of this, which is as we are seeking this, how do we organize ourselves? Organize, for example, of keeping the places where change is to be driven, maybe as a separate focus group to start with. It may also mean changes in the way the metrics are organized, the reward systems are there, and some of that needs to be considered. It means getting people who can make those shifts happen. So there is this aspect of organizing, partly in the culture part of organizational change and partly in the physical structure and the more solid, more relatively speaking, rational ways of running the organization. And in this, there are two aspects. One is that of finding and identifying the change. And the second aspect is having got that shift of how do you go about delivering it. Both of these need talent and resources of different types. There is talent needed to transition if we haven't changed in the past a lot, where the company has been relatively more static and not responding to the environment or not taking that into account. So how do you work out the transition? Because those skills, those sensitivities may not be there. Equally, even if you have a change path, even if you have a new reality which you want to chase around, there may be functional holes which need to be filled. There may be things, let's say, in the context of today's environment, where many companies may be seeking digital marketing skills. And those kind of resources and talent needs to be figured in. Not necessarily internally, but there have to be innovative ways of getting that talent and fast, because some of the change happening is with great speed. I think the last part, which is important in talent resources, is that as we develop into new areas, newer competencies need to be built in a focused manner. And essentially, there is a balance which is needed between the creative, the magic, the kind of things which have been alluded to, which are more flexible, along with the things which have rigor, rationale, priorities, and structure to monitor the progress. So there is a diverse set of areas which need to be considered as we look at trying to make the new reality happen. And a lot of that is anchored around this whole set of things which people do, organizations do, and making change leaders and changing the culture. I stop at this stage and see if there are any questions before we go to the next thing. So essentially, I'll just summarize. We looked at the whole universe of change, and we felt there is an opportunity in the change. Part of that was discovering the change opportunity. And another part was to make it happen. We felt the change leadership and organizing is the pivotal thing which can make the change happen. With this, I'd just like to close And it is a diverse and vexing subject. And if there are any views, any questions, we can take them now. Thank you.
Mr. Balraman, with your permission, maybe a couple of questions can we take?
Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, sir. So there's a question from LRN. You know, LRN was a former Chief Operation Officer of Titan. What are the skills required for spotting new opportunities? It's come in the chat box. I'll go to the YouTube and other things later.
Anybody like to take that? Okay. I think, firstly, there has to be a great sensitivity to what is happening in the environment, both technically as well as in terms of regulatory, people, and other elements which are contributing to the change. And really, it is that sensitivity, which is a very deep level, which can help identify what could be an opportunity. Of course, there has to be a lot of rationality, which then layers onto it, to pin down exactly what we want to chase and with what kind of resources or approach. But to me, that powerful understanding is the starting point of anything.
Thank you, sir. Again, a question from the chat box, Mr. Venkateshwaran. He says, COVID situation may last few years till safe and proven vaccine or treatment protocol regime is established. What kind of change do you anticipate then? And he also got another supplementary question to this is the increase in nationalism as opposed to globalization going to accelerate change or act as a speed breaker?
Okay. I think in today's environment, there are lots of experts on COVID. I would just hazard a couple of things in the aspect of changes which it might get across. So firstly, it has brought about great amount of disruption in what has happened as a result of COVID. Not all of it may be enduring changes, but the disruption is of a huge order. The second is that changes which have happened in the context of some sectors is very high. So two sectors which strike me. One is the way in which people interact personally and on work has changed and has led to a lot of things moving into the digital arena. Whether it is in terms of the way we work, whether it's in the terms of the way we shop, the way we go out or don't go out, etc. And those changes are likely to continue. The second area where changes have been very significant has been this whole area of health. And there's a much greater sensitivity on health. And COVID has triggered off far more innovation in the health space, as well as far more receptivity of people to changes in the way they take care of health. And most of these would continue for some time. But above all, it has made change come down to the language of every person, down to the language of every company and every individual. And that itself will trigger new ways of thinking and doing stuff.
Neeraj, I'm amazed by the speed with which a very large number of companies launched sanitizers. You see, today Dettol claims that it is COVID proof. And you see Louis Vuitton having a face mask which is fashion and stylized.
Yes.
You know, the world has got used to the new opportunity. And if it can be a fashionable face mask,
yes.
To what further extent can the world adapt to this change? This really shows that the world is very quick and the world does adapt.
Yes, the people have utilized what is available very quickly in trying to recalibrate their businesses. So whether it is immunity-led responses from pharma companies and stuff of that kind, whether it is utilizing masks, these have been extremely swift off the block. Simply the working patterns, and I think Rajiv can talk about it in terms of how companies in the IT space have re-engineered their work patterns.
No, payment space has vastly increased, right? What did Rajiv mean when he said he can do bet? He has a collaboration opportunity. What exactly is that? Can he give an example?
Yeah, sure. So, Mr. Balaraman, basically, if you look at if I can just bring forth the example of a payment transaction, and if you see, so take a simple example that somebody from a store is buying a loaf of bread and paying using some digital instrument. At that point in time, at one level, we can say, okay, this gentleman is buying a loaf of bread and there is money moving. But at another level, there are three people who came together. There was the store which was selling the loaf of bread. There is a brand, let us say Britannia or whatever, which was there behind the bread, and there was potentially some digital instrument. Now, if you look at it, all these three people would have marketed to this consumer at some point in time. They would have marketed to this consumer. The banking brand would have done its own acquisition of the consumer. Britannia would have come up with its own methods of marketing to the consumer to say prefer me, and the merchant himself would have done a bunch of things, maybe right from digital marketing or ATL to maybe even simple catchment area marketing. So all the three of them were talking to the same consumer, but they were probably not digitally talking to each other. So, and when you take an example of why are they not digitally talking to each other, it's a very human, interesting aspect there. If you take the large company and they don't compete with each other, that's an interesting part. These are three different kinds of sellers. They're selling different benefits. One is selling access to a store, one is selling a product, and one is selling a digital means of moving money. They're very three different organizations, but they don't talk to each other for the same consumer. And that's where the exciting piece is. So if, for example, they had a way of collaborating and figuring out that, look, I can access this consumer together. And look, if I can access the consumer together, I need to put only 1/3 the acquisition cost. Why do I need to put the same acquisition cost? Because a consumer is buying only one loaf of bread. So that is where the collaboration comes. And today you would see it in some examples. I'll give an example of what is already happening in the market today. You would see some interesting concepts of EMI schemes on say, buying an Apple iPhone. Where HDFC Bank says, look, if you use my card, you get, and you go to a store, you can get a EMI scheme, and where 6 months EMI is going to be free, and any store. Actually, if you look at it, and that digitally happens at the point of transaction. Three parties have come together. Apple has come together, HDFC Bank has come together, and there are a set of about 25,000 small general trade merchants who have come together. And all these people otherwise they could not have come together unless there was a digital way of bringing them together. That small merchant, in fact, probably nobody in Apple even recognizes him. Probably nobody in HDFC even recognizes him. So the digital capability of a payment transaction to bring forth, consummate the vision, the marketing capabilities of all the people behind it who wanted the transaction to happen and make it happen more efficiently, discover newer ways of making it happen, is a tremendous marketing. It's already happening today in the space. And well, that was never possible earlier.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
The next question, so we got a few minutes. We'll try and take a couple of questions as much as possible. We have more than 1,200 viewers watching. A lot of questions come, a lot of excitement. Next question is from Mr. Ravi Purushothaman, is the current president of MMA. Sir. So this question is...
Hi, Ravi. Happy to have you.
So Ravi, you are there. You can... And your question is, for large organizations, do you see moving ambidextrous organization and self-managed teams instead of traditional structures can be more agile? Ravi?
Question is to Irina.
Question is to a speaker, but I request any of the panelists could take this question.
I think Irina can handle this. Are you there? Can you unmute her, please?
She's unmuted, sir. Irina, madam?
I think
yes, she's there. Yes, madam. Please.
Yes, sorry. Can you repeat that again, please?
The question is, for large organizations, do you see moving ambidextrous organization and self-managed team instead of traditional structures can be more agile?
So I think what large organizations are learning is that large organizations are a series of small organizations. And the agility has to come people who are working on Horizon 1 as well as Horizon 2 as well as Horizon 3. And so this is where I think the point that Mr. Balaji made about purpose becomes the glue that keeps these teams together. It's difficult to have an agile team working only on two things and a standard team working on the old one, because then you're creating a caste system and everybody wants to belong to the. So I think biggest learning large companies are having is everybody today has to be digital, not just a digital team. Everybody today has to be comfortable with reskilling and learning themselves. Otherwise, everybody will be redundant by the time they're 35 or 40. And third, that the ways of working in a large organization is to think of a large organization as a series of small organizations. Now, what's the implication of this on organization structure? The biggest implication of this on organization structure is actually collaboration at the top. The top team, which is actually organized by functions or by divisions, traditionally did not have as much reason to work with each other because that structure was built for efficiency. But now we have to balance between efficiency and effectiveness. And so the biggest change here is actually the co-ownership of KPIs and of deliveries at the level that reports to the CEO. That is where collaboration is critical. The rest of the organization picks it up within 30 days if the top team collaborates.
Hey, Shankar, please. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, madam. Please go ahead.
So,
Sorry for the interruption.
yeah, so that's the lesson that we are learning, which is joint collaboration at the top, shared KPIs, a very different set of attitudes from the big heroes at the top of the organization. Cascading it down to the rest of the organization is often easier because they just reflect the culture that is demonstrated by the top 10, 15 guys.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very insightful.
I just would like to add something to this, just backing that point up. Except for the fact that we have COVID and the fact that it's actually a pandemic, every other element of the way we've been working because of digital has been, I think, the best experience I've had in our company. And we were just not digital before. And the speed at which everybody picked it up, the level of collaboration, the level of engagement across rank and file has been phenomenal. I can't state that enough. Phenomenal. So I completely agree. I think it is completely transformed. It has given us an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. And the level of interconnectivity now is at a level that I hope we never lose.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Can we take one last question, Mr. Balraman?
Yeah.
Yes. When you and your organizations fallen into the trap of pursuing the next orbit idea with an old mindset, is this a self-created disaster from happening? This viewer, Arvind Kumar from Delhi, sir, is from YouTube. Any one of you can take these questions.
Maybe Arvind.
I restate my point on purpose. I mean, anybody can come up with new ideas and you can randomly come up with new ideas and you can get sidetracked a lot. If we are clear about the purpose of the organization and you communicate that well enough to the team, I think you find self-alignment come together quite easily because people have a set of systems and values to think through it. So that's my solution to this.
Over to you, Mr. Balraman, for your closing remarks. After that, we do the concluding word of thanks.
Well, it has been a very intense session, only in the area of gray cells. Deep thinking, deeper thinking, and deepest thinking. So this is typical of what Neeraj would serve every day in ponds. So I'm reliving those days. And he's got an extremely apt and suitable panel of 3 other intellectuals with him. I want to thank each one of them for taking the time and being with us here today. And, we always have to live in the forward. We always have to live tomorrow, for tomorrow, but we always learn from the past. So, to that extent, I think tomorrow we'll have even newer things to teach us. And that is what is most exciting about all of this. Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you, Irina. Thank you, Arvind. And thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Mr. Balraman. I think it's a big learning experience. And all the panelists, I am deeply indebted for all your insights as well as the questions. Thank you, sir.
you so much, sir. On behalf of President MMA and Mr. Balraman, we would like to present to you a token of our appreciation for sparing your valuable time. This on your behalf, of you and all the special invitees, we present this mask to the people who are needy in and around Madras Management Medicine. We go to their houses, make them really understand how important it is to wear them, and when they step out, we caution them. And thank you so much for accepting our request. We'll be presenting 300 face masks to the people in and around the people, and we also work to some of the NGOs. But everybody gets this. There should be no shortage of thing, and this is how our volunteers go to different places and hand over them and make them learn them understand. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the viewers. In spite of IPL coming in, son, more than 1,200 viewers are watching this program today. Thanks so much to each one of you. Thank you, Mr. Balraman, for chairing this session as usual, very, very ably, and bringing some outstanding speakers, outstanding thought-provoking insights for this evening. And thanks to distinguished speaker this evening, Mr. Neeraj. I know how much you prepared, and you are really a source of inspiration for us. And we are going to take your input all through to make sure that our brand MMA goes to the next level. Thank you, Mr. Arvind Balaji, Joint Managing Director, Lucas TVS, and Mr. Irina Vittal, and Mr. Rajiv Agarwal for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you more often in MMA in future programs too. And thanks so much, all ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'm sure people must have given your feedback. Your feedback is very, very important. We would like to take them and really appreciate your support in this regard. Thanks to each one of you. Stay safe and enjoy the IPL. All the people watching the program from South, all the very best. Let the Chennai Super King win. All those who are watching up the West from Mumbai, we will wish the Mumbai Indians to win, and may the best team win this evening, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, and good night, and bye-bye. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning some.